worksheet? All right, so the first thing that we're going to practice on this worksheet is we're going to make sure that we can write an equation. Okay, so we have a picture, we're going to write an equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where the curve hits the y-axis. So I am starting right here, and I'm just going to follow it for one complete cycle of the graph. So it goes up, it comes down, it goes up again, and then that's one whole period of the graph. Okay? That is one whole period of the graph. All right. So I have for my equation y equals, does this look like a sine graph or a cosine graph? Sine. Is it positive or negative?
Negative.
What? It's positive.
It's positive. How do you know it's positive? It goes up first and then it comes down. And that's normal. Okay?
I was looking at the little line.
All right. So next, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a dotted line right down the middle. That's the midline. And that helps me figure out what my amplitude is. So what is the amplitude? Wait, be careful. So from 4, it goes up how many? It goes up 3, and it goes down 3. So what's the amplitude? 3. So I'm going to write y equals 3 sine x. Okay? Next, I have to see if the period of the graph is normal or not. What's a normal period for the graph?
1.
The normal period for the graph. So look back at your notes. Don't ask me. Look back at your notes. It's 2 pi. 2 pi is normal. Okay? Is the period of this graph 2 pi? It's only 2 boxes, right? 1, 2. And the third box, this third box right here says pi. So we took a pi, we divided it into 3. So what's each box worth? It's pi thirds. This is 1 pi third. This is 2 pi thirds. This is 3 pi thirds. Okay? So the whole period of the graph, an entire cycle of the graph happens from 0 to 2 pi thirds. So that's not normal, right? Okay. So there should be a b value. I'm going to write this lightly in pencil because I'm going to erase it. So if you have a pen, do not write that. So I wrote a b in pencil. Remember, the formula for finding the period is to write 2 pi divided by b. That's the formula, right? 2 pi divided by b is the formula, and that gives us a period of 2 pi thirds. 2 pi divided by b gives us an answer that the period is 2 pi thirds. So what's the b value?
3.
3. Okay? So right in front of the x, I'm going to erase that b, and I'm going to put a 3 there instead. Okay. And then the number on the end is how far up or down the curve shifted, and it is the midline. The midline tells us how far up or down it shifted. And it's 4, but it's not quite 4. It's a negative 4. It moved down 4. So we're going to put minus 4 at the end. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I want us to write a sine equation. We just did that. And a cosine equation. Okay? So you do not need another marker color. You can do this with just one, but I'm going to show you what I mean in another color. We can call this a cosine equation. You guys see that? And that would be like I shifted the graph. I took the graph, and it's like I shifted it left a little bit. Do you see that? It's to the left side of the y-axis. And this would be an upside-down cos graph. So I could write the equation that way. Or I could look from right here to right here and say that that's a cosine graph that has been shifted to the right. Which one would you guys rather do? The right. Okay. So if you guys want, you could maybe trade with somebody in your group for right now and just have a second marker color so that you guys can see the cosine one. Okay, so there are some things that are going to be the same about the cosine graph. what is the same about the cosine graph?
The midline.
The cosine graph has the same midline.
Yeah.
The cosine graph has the same period.
Yeah.
The cosine graph has the same amplitude.
Yeah.
What is different about the cosine graph?
It starts
Yeah,
different.
so it could start up or down, right? So it could be a reflection or not. We'd have to check that every single time. What else could be different about the cosine graph?
Where it ends.
It's been shifted. It's been shifted to the right or left. Okay? So here, I'm going to start off with y equals. We chose the option that was the positive version. So I'm going to call this positive 3 because we chose the positive version. And this time we have cos of, and I'm going to have the 3 factored out. Okay? I'm going to write the 3 factored out. And then I have the minus 4 on the end. So the amplitude was the same. The amplitude was still 3. The midline was still negative 4. It still had a period of 2 pi thirds. So all those numbers are the same. My cosine graph happens to be positive, which is the only reason that this 3 stayed positive. They won't necessarily, the signs on these two won't necessarily match up every single time. It depends on how you do the problem. Okay? Does that make sense so far? All right. Now we have a graph that is shifted to the right. So what should I put in the parentheses? Yeah, x minus. Okay? And it shifted to the right half of a box. So if one box is pi over 3, then half of a box is pi over 6. Okay? So one whole box was pi over 3. So half of a box was pi over 6. Okay? And we are done. We wrote 2 equations. Now, if some people in the class had done the version that shifted to the left a little bit, then their answer would be different than yours. Does that make sense? There are infinitely many ways to write the answers to this. There are lots and lots of equations you could write that would be correct. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Let's try number 2. So I'm going to start at the y-axis, and I'm going to highlight one full cycle. So I start at the bottom, it goes up, it comes back down again. That is one full cycle. And this is a cosine. Okay, so this is a cosine. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a dotted line at the middle because that's going to help me figure out where my midline is, but it also helps me figure out my amplitude. Okay. Yeah. So sine graphs start in the middle. Cosine graphs start at the top or start at the bottom. That's the only way to tell the difference. Other than that, they look the same. Okay. So this one starts at the bottom. So is it a positive cosine graph or a negative cosine graph? It's negative. Regular cosine graphs start at the top. This starts at the bottom, so it's a negative cosine graph. So I'm going to write y equals negative, and I'm going to put the cos. I'm leaving a little space because I know I have an amplitude there of something other than 1. Can you guys tell what the amplitude is? 2. Yeah, it goes up from the middle, it goes up 2, and it goes down 2, so that means we have an amplitude of 2. From the middle. From the middle, how far do you go up? From the middle, how far do you go down? Okay, so we have the amplitude. We know that it's a cos graph. Now we have to decide what number should go in front of x. So we need to know what the period of this graph is. So I'm going to put an x there. I know that there's probably a number in the front. What's the period of this graph? It's 2 pi thirds again. So this time, again, we have 3 boxes to get to pi. So this is 1/3. This is 2/3. This is 3 pi thirds. Okay? 1 pi third, 2 pi thirds, 3 pi thirds. So just like on the last problem, we're going to say the formula is 2 pi over b, and that formula gave us an answer that the period of this graph was 2 pi over 3. So if we used a formula 2 pi divided by b, and we got 2 pi thirds as our answer, what's the b value? 3. Okay. So negative 2 cos of 3x. And then at the very end, we say how much it has shifted up or down. And the up or down shift is based on the midline. Up 2, plus 2. If we had parentheses here, we would put them around the 3x. And you technically don't need them. Okay. All right. How are we doing with that part? Okay. So for us to figure out a sine equation, we have 2 options. We have more than 2 options, but I'm going to give us 2 options. We can do this part right here. You guys see that? We could make that equation. Or we could do this part right here. You guys want to do this, the part that's a little bit to the left of the y-axis?
Yeah.
Or the part that's a little bit to the right?
I see what you're saying. Let's you saying that you want to.
Okay, so if we do this way, then we would say that our sine graph has shifted to the left. And we're going to have a negative sine graph because it goes down first and then up.
Are you going to do that one?
If we do this one, we're going to have a sine graph that has shifted to the right, and the sine graph is going to be positive. We can do either one. You guys want to do? Try the left one? We could do that because we did positive last time, so let's do negative this time. So I'm going to say it starts right here. I'm going to say this is the one I'm doing this time. Okay, so some things have stayed the same. We still need a y equals in front. We still have an amplitude of 2. It's a sine graph. What else is the same? The 3 should still be in front of the x. I'm writing it a little bit differently this time because I need to be able to have that horizontal shift left or right. So I'm leaving some space for that. What else is the same? The midline of 2. We already did the amplitude, right? We already did the 2 in the front. So you're right, that is the same. We already did that.
The plus 2?
The plus 2 at the end for the midline, that is also the same. Okay? So the 2 things that we have to consider is this a right side up graph or an upside down graph? And how far did it shift to the left or right?
It shifted pi 6.
It shifted pi 6. It shifted half a box.
Yeah.
Do we see that? Yeah. So if this is the y-axis, it went to the left half a box. Yes. So we're going to say plus x plus, and how much is half a box? Pi over 6. Okay? And then in the front, is this a right side up graph, or has it been flipped upside down? It's been flipped, and we can tell that because it went down first. Okay. So that is one possible way of writing the equation. Is it the only way? No. But it is a possible way. Make sense? Okay. We're going to skip 3 for now because you can't even see a full rotation, and that would make your brains explode too early. So let's go ahead. Same thing. It's going to be the same thing with number 4. Let's go ahead and skip 3 and 4 for now. We can come back to those. And let's look at number 5. So grab your marker. And we are going to trace one period of the graph. So I'm starting on the y-axis, and I'm going to trace one period of the graph. Nancy, are you tracing it? Okay. There's one period of the graph. So, does this look like a cosine graph or a sine graph? It looks like a cosine graph, right? You guys realize that cosine graphs and sine graphs are the same. They're exactly the same. They just, here, based off the way that I drew it, it looks to me like I'm ready to write a cosine equation. Okay. And they're the same because, right, if you look at this, I can write a cosine equation and a sine equation. So I can write 2 different equations for the same graph. So I'm saying I'm looking at the part that makes it look like a cos graph, but technically cos graphs and sine graphs are exactly, they look the same if you look at the whole thing. They go up, down, up, down, up, down. right? And so the difference between a sine graph and a cos graph is I'm saying that the original starts off as a sine graph, but if I take it and I shift it a little bit, I can think of it as a cos graph. So truly, when I say, is this a sine or a cos graph, you should all be like, hey, Ms. Rice, it's both at the same time. We're just going to write the cos version of this one happens to be easiest to write, and then we can write the sine version next, okay? So just the way I'm phrasing it is weird, and you guys kind of have known what I meant, but I do want to clarify that every single one of these is a cos graph and a sine graph at the same time, okay? But based off the way this one looks, it would be easier to write a cos equation first. Yeah. So I start at the y-axis, and I just draw one full cycle. So it started up, and I draw till where it ends. So it starts up, ends up, and then I've got one full cycle. Okay? So it looks like a cos to start with. The cos is going to be the easiest version for us to write, to start with. For this problem. For this problem, cos is the easiest to write to start with. So I have y equals, is this a positive or a negative? Positive. It starts up, it ends up. So that's a positive. Does anyone know what the amplitude is? 1. I'm going to go ahead and write 1 just so that I remember that I did the amplitude. So if you need it, the dotted line is right here. Okay. There's our middle, our midline. And from the middle, it goes up 1 and down 1. And that's how we knew the amplitude was 1. And we said this was a cos. The cos is the easiest to write, so we're going to call it a cos graph. Okay. And what's the period of this graph? Pi halves. So the formula is 2 pi over b. So we're going to say 2 pi divided by b equals an answer of pi over 2. And this one is not as easy to solve as the other one.
4.
So if you didn't automatically see it, to solve an equation where you have a fraction equals a fraction, you can cross multiply. So if we cross multiply, what do we get? We get 4 pi. 4 pi equals b times pi. And we can cancel out the pi's, right? Divide by pi, divide by pi. And then 4 equals b. Does that make sense? So every single time I want to find the b value, I take my formula for how I found the period. 2 pi divided by b is the formula for how we find the period. And I set that equal to the period that I have for this particular graph. So 2 pi divided by b equals pi over 2.
So you can cancel out the pi for the first one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So 4 equals b, so that means we have 4 times x. And if we wanted to put parentheses, we would put them right there. And then what number goes on the end? Minus 3, that's the middle. Minus 3. Okay. So that's my yellow. Okay. And if I want to shift it, right, to look at the sine equation, do you guys want to shift and look at this one right here? Or do you guys want to look at this one right here? The one to the right? Yeah. Or if we wanted to be crazy, we could look at this one all the way over here. You guys don't want to be crazy? That just means it shifted to the left like a lot. I mean, it's kind of hard sometimes to see how far it shifted. You deal with fractions a little bit more. So just, there's lots of answers you can have for this though. Okay, so Ellie said she wanted to do the one to the right, so we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to start right here. So there's our sine curve right there. So I'm going to say y equals, and I know the amplitude stays the same. It's still an amplitude of 1 sine. I know that the number in front of x stays the same, so that's 4. I'm putting the parentheses so I can shift it to the left or right. I know that I still have a midline of -3, so that has stayed the same. So the only two things that I'm changing is I'm looking to see if there should be a positive or a negative in the very front. And I'm looking to see how far to the right or to the left I shifted. Okay? All right. So, should we have a positive or a negative in the front?
Negative.
A negative. And how did you know?
Because it starts down.
Yeah, it goes down first. So that's negative. Okay. Now this part is a little bit harder, how far it went to the right, because it's just like this point right here, and then we have a lot of open space, right? Right? So we have to think about how these graphs are made. Does that make sense? We have to think about how these graphs are made. So if we look at the original, what I did in yellow, you guys see the part I did in yellow? This line right here that I did in yellow, if this was pi halves and this part is right in the middle, then what would this be? Pi fourths. All right, and then this part where it crosses the midline is going to be in the middle of that, which is pi over 8. Okay, so how far to the right did our sine graph move? Pi 8ths. So we're going to say x minus, because it's to the right, pi over 8. Okay. Huh? You don't memorize it so much as if you actually understand what each part is, then you can kind of make sense of it and just do it. But if you're trying to memorize the whole process, that's going to be hard if you don't actually understand what you're doing. Okay. All right, let's try the next one. This one's like super steep. Did you see that? Okay, so first I'm going to look to see where it crosses the y-axis. And I think it crosses right here at 5. Okay. Okay. So does it make more sense to write a sine equation first or a cosine equation? Sine. Okay.
I'm just gonna guess that sine, it kind of looks like an X.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
Miss, Miss Russ, when you said that, I wrote this on the top. I thought that you meant when it's in the middle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It wouldn't go all the way up.
No, because all the way up would be more than a full cycle. Okay. All right. So we're going to write a sine equation. We have y equals, is it a positive sine equation or a negative? Positive. Okay. Does anyone know the amplitude? 4? I agree with that. Okay. We have an amplitude of 4. So the middle is at 5, and it goes up to 9, so it's up 4, and it goes down to 1, so it's down 4. Okay. So we have an amplitude of 4, sine, okay, and the period of the graph, the whole graph only happens in one box. Do you guys see that? The whole graph happens in one box. If the pi is all the way over here, then what does one box equal? A third. So this is 1/3, this is 2/3, this is 3 pi thirds. So the whole period of the graph is 1/3. So I'm going to say the formula of the period is 2 pi divided by b, and 2 pi divided by b equals one period of the graph, which is pi over 3. B does not equal 3, because this is not 2 pi and 2 pi. So I'm going to do my cross multiplying this time. So I have 6 pi equals b times pi, and the pi's cancel, and you get 6.
But I said 6 for a number reason.
Because 6 divided by 3 is 2?
No, because if you split a pi third, I got pi 6.
Oh, sure. Okay. So it's kind of like you divided each side by 2. Yeah. That works too. Okay. So we have 6x. And what's the midline? 5. So plus 5 on the end. Okay. Woohoo! Woohoo! Okay.
I say it every time, but I actually understand.
All right. Now, do you guys want to do? Are you ready? Do we want to do this part right here, this upside down part, or do we want to do this part right here and do a right side up? Upside down? Okay, we're going to do upside down.
And the cosine looks like a C. Besides, why didn't you just say that?
All right, so let's go ahead and start it. We have y equals. What stuff stays the same? 4. We don't know if it's positive or negative. Well, we probably do, but I'm not going to write it yet. We keep the 4. What else do we keep? We keep the 6, and I keep the x, but I leave some space, and I keep the plus 5. Okay. Yeah, except the middle and except for the front, because we don't know if it's positive or negative. Okay. Now, based on what I made dark, should it be a positive or a negative in the front? Negative. It's an upside down cos graph. Okay. All right, and then we have to figure out these fractions here, right? Can you tell how much of a box it moved to the left? It would be 1/4 of a box. Okay, so here's how I can tell. I'm looking at my yellow now. I'm going to be able to tell based on my yellow. Okay, so my yellow crosses right here in the middle. You guys see that based on the yellow? So if this was pi thirds, then the middle is pi over 6. Okay, and then the middle of this is where I hit that high point. So if that was pi 6, then what's the middle of that? Pi 12. Okay? And so what they did is they took the low point and they shifted it from here to here. So if this, it's the same amount as this right here. And that was pi 12ths. So they shifted it to the left, pi 12ths. So we're going to write plus, right? Opposite of what you would think. Shifted it to the left, pi 12ths.
So why did you say it moved forward?
I said it moved 1/4 of a box. 1/4 of a box is pi 12ths because the whole box is pi thirds. Yeah. So the reason I could tell, are we listening? The reason I could tell that it shifted 1/4 of a box is because 1/4 of a box is the difference between a cosine graph and a sine graph, if they just shift a little bit like that. So you'll notice the same amount of shift happened last time too. It shifted to the right 1/4 of a box.
Word.
You guys notice that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so here's what I want from you. I want you to do, on the next page, I want you to do number 1. Do number 1 and number 5 and number 4. 1, 4, and 5. Okay?
Do we have to do the 2?
Yes. 1, 4, and 5.
Because
1, 4, and 5 doing 2.